Great. Well, thanks everybody. Welcome to our fourth presentation in the Working Tools Seminar Series. My name is Andrew Martindale, and I am extending a welcome to you on behalf of Eric Simons and Alison Wiley as organizers of our series, Community-Facing Data Management Platforms for Indigenous University Partnerships. This is our fourth, and if you've missed any of our previous talks, please know that they are available on our website. You can track that down. I'll put the link in the chat, and you can catch up if you've missed any. I'd like to begin by acknowledging our Musqueam hosts at UBC Vancouver for their hospitality and allowing us to live and work on their territory. UBC Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The land it is situated on has always been a place of learning for the Musqueam, who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on this site. And I'm going to include in the link a chat to Musqueam Elder Larry Grant's welcoming message, which is posted on UBC's website, which conveys this meeting more fully than I can. And I thought you might want to have a look at Larry's version of the welcome. This week, also, I want to draw your attention to a recent article by UBC anthropologist Professor Charles Menzies titled, "All That Crap, Realizing Our Indigenous Utopian Potential," which presents a bracing critique of how non-Indigenous indulgence in essentializing indigeneity can create significant barriers to understanding and affecting decolonizing practice. I'm a big fan of Charles and his writing. So I'll put that link to this great article in the chat as well. And a few guidelines, a few housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones and video feeds turned off. If you have a question or a comment during the presentation, please add it to the chat or let us know that you'd like to ask something. And in the discussion period afterwards, you'll be welcomed to turn on your microphone and ask the question. My colleague from UBC Okanagan, Neha Gupta, is going to stand in for Eric today, and she will compile these for discussion after the presentation. Thanks, Neha, for your help. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Dave Schaepe and Matt McGinity to you. Dave is the director and senior archaeologist of the Stolo Research and Resource Management Center at Stolo Nation, and Matt is the center's GIS analyst and referrals co-administrator. Dave earned his PhD in anthropology from the University of British Columbia in 2009. And in addition to working at Stolo Nation, he is an adjunct professor at Simon Fraser University's School of Resource Management and Environmental Management, and an instructor of Indigenous Studies at the University of the Fraser Valley. He is renowned in archaeology for both his pioneering work with Stolo Nation and for his equally pioneering scholarship. He is the lead author of one of my favorite articles of all time, Archaeology as Therapy, Connecting Belongings, Knowledge, Time, Place, and Well-Being, which argues that Stolo archaeology draws from and resides in a wide cultural frame with deep resonance for descent communities, a resonance that can serve as a model for improving human health. I'll put that link in the chat as well. I think it's an article we should all read. Matt is also a graduate of UBC as well as from BCIT, and is a key member of the Stolo Research and Resource Management Center, whose work for Stolo Nation fulfills many of the aspirations that this series anticipates. And their paper today, which presents the core data management tool used at Stolo Nation, is titled Stolo Connect, a digital system supporting Stolo heritage, land, environmental stewardship. Please join me in welcoming Dave and Matt. Gentlemen.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. And I will just begin by thanking Andrew, Eric, and Allison as the organizers for this series, and really appreciate the amount of time and attention you put into working through to figuring out a way to make this happen, and using this novel approach, which is becoming, I guess, more commonplace, but novel approach to bringing people together again on a virtual platform, and seeing how many people are able to join today from what are clearly all these different locations. It's excellent, and I really appreciate that. Very good solution to the issues you faced in making this happen. So I just want to thank you all for your efforts and continued commitment to seeing this through. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Why don't we shift Matt to sharing the screen at this point, and we can launch into the prepared presentation portion of our visit with you today. First, if everyone can hear okay, hopefully that's the case. And
yep, you're good. Your sound is very good.
Perfect. Slideshow.
That should just be.
It's technology is funny sometimes. So give us a moment here as to why the standard PowerPoint is not showing as a slideshow. Slideshow, down, drop down.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh no, that's okay. I think in large part, if you can minimize the sideline. There you go. Good enough. That's got it. All right. Well, again, the title's changed a few times here, but it's really about in line with what this whole seminar and this series of presentations is about. Community-facing digital platforms for data management, organization, and use. And what we're talking about today is a tool that we've developed here called Stalo Connect. Matt is the primary administrator, helped with the development of the system. And we are going to talk about this today as a First Nations built digital system supporting Stalo heritage and environmental stewardship. And we use that term heritage environment as a continuum, which is why it's hyphenated here. So we'll flip to the next slide and then just introduce ourselves. Again, appreciate the introduction that was provided. Very, very kind words. Matt, why don't you who you are?
My name's Matt McGinity. I'm a first-generation Canadian. Both of my folks were born in New Zealand and came over in the 70s. I am a graduate of UBC, so nice to see some familiar faces there. That was in 2007. In 2012, I was hired on at SRMC after a couple years floating around the province doing archaeology. And that was kind of right at the point where Stalo Connect was being operationalized for the first time. So that was kind of my role, was taking this system that had been developed and making it work, making it run, which we'll be talking about in a minute.
Excellent. And again, Dave Schaepe here as the director for the Stalo Research and Resource Management Center, and been working in this field for quite some time. Also not from here. And in a sense, when we're talking about community-facing work, I think I have to place myself in that context as a collaborator with the communities and the folks who are Stalo and from here. And the SRMC, as an acronym for our department, really is at the service of the communities. We're not a First Nation organization directly in that sense. We are part of a service agency that provides services for the First Nations and other First Nation organizations. And what we're going to talk about today is part of what we've developed in line with that field of service. So where are we? We are actually coming to you live from the Kokolitsa grounds. Actually, we're sitting here in the Stalo Resource Center, a place where we do a lot of our work, houses our department, and it in itself is located on the Kokolitsa grounds, which houses the headquarters of Stalo Nation. And that in itself is located within the Chilkowiak traditional lands of the Stalo Coast Salish peoples. So we'll move from there to what we are going to aim to get at today. Our goal is to split the time. We have roughly, an hour and 20 minutes remaining. We'll run through the prepared presentation along these lines, and we'll aim to answer a few key questions. We want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers, and to certainly serve to make this interactive. So as we're going through the presentation today, please feel free to ask questions, and we're happy to field those as we go. Otherwise, really just want to introduce you to what Stalo Connect is and how it interfaces with digital Stalo heritage data and data management. And we've really taken that focus as far as the heritage aspect of its contents and use, given the foundation of the series that you're hosting within more or less the field of archaeology and anthropology related departments. So how does this factor into Stalo heritage environmental stewardship? How and in what way does Stalo Connect serve us to serve the communities? The presentation will be broken down into 4 key parts, more or less, and we'll begin by, before we get into demonstrations, looking at the origins, getting at the question of what is Stalo Connect, where did it come from? So we'll talk a bit about its origins. We'll move to some live demonstration of the system, and we'll flip back and forth to some additional applications, to some of the broader perspectives and relations to beyond more site-specific aspects of heritage places and so on, to more land use oriented applications in terms of a broader range of stewardship. And then again, back to some live demos, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers and take it from there. So we're game to entertain anything that you have as questions for us. And with that, before we move farther, are there any particular questions at this point, or are we good to just launch into our origins?
I haven't got anything in the chat right now.
Okay. So I'll keep an eye. We can see Andrew, and we'll keep an eye on Andrew. Give us a wave, or just let us know if there's a question that comes in. So these next two slides are what we call our full of text slides, and it's really just to, for the sake of being able to revisit this without, being able to narrate it necessarily. It's there as a reference to help understand what StaloConnect is. I think there's about 8 key points altogether between this and the next slide, and really what it is a system we developed from scratch. It's a self-built system, tailor-made to our needs. So it's a digital warehouse. It's a management tool. It actually doesn't house a lot of data, but it fields a lot of data that we house in our systems, GIS and otherwise. And it allows us to bring data together as a central point of really communications and use. So it's a warehouse to begin with, and we developed it in collaboration with Culture Code. And if I wasn't able to attend the previous session on the Reciprocal Research Network, but Culture Code, Nick and Ryan are the two fellows who we continue to work with, rooted in our initial relationship with them, founded in participating in the development of the Reciprocal Research Network. And we've drawn from that experience and some of that design to incorporate into the StaloConnect system. The need to develop the system comes out of a driving and pervasive need to address our relationships between Stalo, title rights and interests, and those of the Crown, Indigenous relations. And primarily around, in this case, the driving force was the need to be able to become active or reactivate our position in the relationships around consultation and engagement over land use decisions that are being made either by the provincial or federal governments. The need for the Crown to consult with Indigenous peoples over all land use decisions is the predominant foundation of need for this system. While way back when that was fairly robust, as of 2008, we had almost nothing going. So we're like, we got to get back into this. We need a system to accommodate and house the data we've built in the meantime. It allows for effective access and maintenance of relationships and communications between our communities. It allows us access to the digital data we've built and developed over the years, documenting and inventorying Stalo cultural sites and also areas of environmental concern rooted in the earlier works of the Stalo heritage policy. In a theoretical view, actually not so theoretical, in a real view of taking action in the field of heritage, this is a tool that we use as a way to really build what we would call the field of relations. The field of relations, and we say we operationalize and utilize the StaloConnect system as a means of occupying the field of relations around who has a right to make decisions about what, and in particular, as they occur within the field of land and resource use decision making. And I make reference to a 3-row model, which is a model of relations that I won't talk about it much here right now, but it's a model that I've developed and published on recently as an alternate to any existing models of Crown Indigenous relations where there's a center of the three rows of relations. The centerpiece to that, the third middle row, is one of shared decision-making and co-occupation of place, which is the landscape around us. So we'll go to the next text-heavy slide. So with that, and in that field of relations, very much a field of power relations around rights and title and decision-making, Stalo Connect is this integral part of our process. And again, it serves as a means of integrating our data sets, including the Stalo Heritage Database, which is a key piece. It's fundamental to the development of this system. And when we're looking at, I know in the nature of the overall set of talks that you've organized, in the community-facing approach, stressing the relationship with between communities and academic institutions. It's not the predominant relationship here, but there is a substantial relationship that we'll get at, especially when it comes to the development of the Stalo Heritage Database. So again, a web-based tool, it helps us in our communications on a number of faces. It helps us with the communication and access to data we house here within the SRRMC. It helps provide a means of communication and sharing data with the 15 First Nations who are members of the South Tamuk Stewardship Alliance, who we provide the service for in terms of engagement consultation processes. It allows us to communicate with the other offices of those 15 First Nations. It allows us to communicate with multiple federal and provincial agencies, and also with multiple development components. So it's really a core to data housing, data sharing, and communications along those lines. And again, it provides a means of implementing the Stalo Heritage Policy, the South Tamuk Use Plan, a broader range stewardship plan that we've developed, and aspects of formative policies around environment, and the STSA's consultation and land use decision-making policy. So it's a means of implementing and activating, taking action on what's otherwise sort of a framework of things set out in policy. And we'll leave it at that, although a key piece to this as to what's central to principled approaches to what we do and why we do it. It moves towards an understanding of taking care of heritage, but heritage is a part of the cultural landscape, as a part of the environment, as an interconnected piece to what's out there, what constitutes South Tamuk in the Halkomelem term for our land or our world. The term and the phrase, or the phrase really that goes like this is South Tamuk te Equala, Chiathmet to Mexdam Equalat, which is, this is our land, period, statement of title. We have to take care of everything that belongs to us. That's the obligation. And the latter piece to that really is what we take as our principal mandate. And on the behalf of the communities who are the title and rights holders, it's that piece that we are looking to provide service to. And so this is one way in which we've been able to work towards that goal, or to facilitate that goal.
Dave, we have a question.
Okay.
Could we interrupt you and pose it?
Perfect timing. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Nia, do you want to relay the question?
Yes, I will do that right now. So the question is, I have to find it. Is there a graph? Somebody would like to know more about the 3-row model. Is there a graphic that summarizes the model, or a link where we can read more?
Yeah. Okay. So great. I'm glad there's a question about it. I'm trying to fishing for interest in this. The 3-row model is you can find it presented in the Oxford Handbook on Public Heritage that was published in a chapter I wrote in there that was published in 2018, I believe, 17 or 18. On if I could remember the title of the chapter, it would be helpful. But it's to do with the co-occupation of place and decision making. And so if you can find it there, and I would suggest that's the best place. If you go to ResearchGate, you can access my materials there. That's one way to get it. but otherwise, that's the best place to find it. And you know, in very quick answer to the question, if you can imagine 3 vertical rows, okay, the 3-row model draws on the historical 2-row wampum, which was established as a representation of relations between indigenous peoples and newcomers in the early 1700s. It was really a treaty, in effect, the principled approach to a treaty between nations, and one of the earliest of those treaties. So the 2-row wampum is actually a wampum belt. It's a white belt as a backdrop with 2 purplish blue rows of wampum. And the concept that's presented there is the relationship is based on the 2 rows being rivers of life, pathways of life, where each of our nations, each people's respects and maintains their own customs, laws, and beliefs, and remains within their canoes, within their distinct rivers of life, set on a backdrop of peace and harmony, right? And it goes, so that actually was the foundational, one of the foundational theories of relations in the early 1700s, which ultimately failed to work, you know, given the manifestation of colonialism. So, you know, one boat effectively didn't stay in its track, and a colonial boat overcame the other. 3-row model, so there's something missing in that model, and what's added is the 3rd row, right, in theory. So the 3rd row is, rather than exclusive relationships, you need to actually harmonize and share decision-making relationships around where we all exist in that backdrop, the landscape of resources, and however they're looked at. So the idea is to each maintain your own customs, laws, and beliefs, but establish a foundation of relations that is fundamentally tied to a sharing of decision-making powers. And as that relates to the use of land and resources that are the interests of the government, industry, and indigenous peoples from various perspectives. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. So 3 vertical rows on a backdrop of a landscape. I call it like early GIS. So hopefully that helps quickly answer that question and give you a reference to refer to in more detail.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Okay. So origins of the system are like this. Back to 1997, mid to later 90s, Stalo Nation Rights and Title Department was working on the development of policy and was involved in heritage management. Since that time, in the development of a Stalo heritage policy, which established definitions for what constitutes Stalo heritage from a Stalo perspective, adopting Stalo worldview. The process has been to define, inventory, and ultimately, you know, digitize this inventory of Stalo heritage sites to be able to map out, to be able to actually reflect or represent Stalo people's cultural landscape in a digital manner. Okay, so this all goes back to longstanding processes, and post 1997, 98 Delgamuukw decision motivating a greater need for consultation by government over decisions they're making on land use sort of landed in the middle of this. So there's an engagement consultation process that is, we call referrals, that sort of drives the need to be able to address the question, what's going to be the impact of any particular proposed development on your interests, meaning rights, title, or otherwise. And so how do you assess that relationship? It's a critical backdrop to understand. And so, you know, around 2007, at that time, we went from having a greater degree of capacity to 2007-ish having very little. And along came, here's our institutional relation with SFU in particular, John Welsh, and he brought to us, as he was coming on board in the region, work he was doing with other Coast Salish communities around heritage and sovereignty. And out of that came 3 specific themes that were linked around what we termed then holism and heritage, how to bring things together. And those were integrating dispersed heritage databases, right? So that meant for us taking our data sets that existed here, there, and everywhere with regards to all these different aspects of heritage, and bringing them together into one consolidated, harmonized, holistic heritage database. So we call it the SHED, the Stalo Heritage Database. A second was to bring together and make whole dispersed collections, and we focused on Scowlets, DHRL16. And that was literally in terms of the physical collections that were held at a number of institutions, and bringing them together to be housed in one place at the Museum of Anthropology with the Lab of Archaeology, and working with UBC partners on that. Also incorporated the Reciprocal Research Network. So this ties into some previous presentation, I believe, that was provided here. The RRN was a foundation for bringing together the information on the materials belongings from Scowlets, bringing it together into one place. So in a digital manner, it can be shared or accessed with and by the community at Scowlets. And thirdly, it was reconnecting belongings with the community in a manner that also, beyond the Reciprocal Research Network, worked to develop the Scowlets Virtual Museum of Canada project, Digital Scowlets. And that's another presentation. It was supposed to have been last week, and apologize for having to shift that, but we'll be having that coming up in December. Talk more about it. So these things all link, and central to the ability to create the Stalo Connect system was the drawing together of the data into one accessible place. And from that, the system was able to build a system that could draw on it quite easily, and to also give us a structure to house data in a manner that was organized and could be added to, and so on and so forth. Could be categorized in various ways, again, building on the categorization, organization of data from a fundamentally Stalo perspective. So that led to the integration of the heritage database into the development of Stalo Connect, and it builds on a concept, again, published in 2007 in Bruce Miller's edited volume on the Coast Salish, the Stalo identity and the cultural landscape of South Timmok. At that time, 2007, the idea was simply what we had were some digital data around, and work towards developing a Stalo heritage stewardship plan, okay, with the many data sets. But when you put that all together to create a composite image, it started to give you a representation of Stalo landscape, okay, using GIS and digital image, a digital image effectively that builds a representation of Stalo landscape. The question and the use at that point was, what's the relationship in this link to the crown? What's the relationship to the provincial, say the province's provincial economic landscape of interest? And so if you can map those two things out and lay them over each other, you can use GIS and some system that we hadn't created yet to identify points of conflict. And then that can lead to, at least through that identification of at least direct points of conflict, potential means of addressing and working out conflict resolution through various types of dispute processes. And it was kind of the point of that article, which was a theory at that time, but it laid the basis for what we were aiming to achieve in development of an actual system that could do this. And so the progressive development was, as of 2007, we had a clearer picture and understanding of a digital view of Stalo cultural landscape, but we had no concept, even though we had stacks and stacks and stacks of paper referrals, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of referrals coming into us. We could not comprehend what the economic landscape looked like, with all of these forestry applications and mining applications and all of these many, many applications that required consultation. It was impossible to understand what that landscape looked like until we started to develop this system. So with that as a lead in, we'll turn it over to, and this is a blurry picture of this database that thought we'd keep it in here just as so we could have one blurry picture and not disappoint anybody. So that's our lead into the demonstration. I'll turn it over to Matt.
Right on. Okay, I just need to get past this. So the drop down keeps blocking me. There we are. Okay, so this is Stall Connect. We are, for our example, we're looking at a small scale salvage excavation placer mine. So they're essentially gold panning at the Hills Bar area just below Yale. Every submission of a referral we get to Stall Connect gets its own page that looks a great deal like this. They open with, of course, our tracking number, a title, and an inlaid map, which we're going to look at a little further, and then a bunch of specifics about the project in question, which we'll also be getting into further. At this point in time, we have 6,000 of these in the system. We have 6,000 referrals going all the way back to our initial pilot for the project in 2012. Great deal of information, and we're going to dive on into it now.
Right, so what that does is we now have this digital representation of various forms of developments, proposed or now actual developments. And this is example of one that we've received under the mining legislation for placer mining in an area within South Timuc that's we know as Hills Bar. So you can create composites of whatever applications through whatever legislation we cover, which is many points of legislation, and build an understanding of and answer the question, what's going on out there through this system. Do you want to look at, take us through the cultural sites?
Absolutely. So we're just jumping over to our map tool here. Stall Connect is not a GIS system, although it borrows some GIS concepts. But one of the key elements of this when it was being designed is making it user-friendly and approachable to people who don't necessarily have a GIS background. So the sort of core function is overlay analysis. So here we have in purple our project area where this would be a placer mine operation. And
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So we mentioned South Timuc, and if I ask you how, okay, so there's this square showing a placer mining location near the town of Yale. Where's South Timuc? Okay. There you go.
Right there. So this black outline is showing specifically the Canadian portion of South Timuc. This is, of course, a reflection of the realities that we're dealing with the province of British Columbia, the federal government of Canada. In actuality, South Timuc would extend below the 49th parallel into the Northern Cascades here in northern Washington. But suffice to say, as well as, you know, into the Salish Sea. But the totality of South Timuc's Canadian portion is defined as the watersheds feeding the Lower Fraser. And sure enough, if we zoom all the way back in.
Actually, if you zoom in, I like to do this because you can see where we are in the world. And if you keep zooming out, you zoom all the way out, you can say, okay, where is South Timuc in relation to the world? And you go, there we are. And you know what? It makes the world look kind of small, which is nice. You can say, it helps us situate ourselves where we are in relationship to the rest of the world. And in blowing out the world, you can still see us, which is kind of cool. We're not that small, but we're connected. So then we can zoom in, exactly.
Yeah. We were doing this in Nova Scotia once and realized Nova Scotia is more or less the same size as South Timuc.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See.
But in any case, if we go back to Yale, here we are with our placer mine. And we've established that we are in fact in Stalo territory, South Timuc. So let's see more specifically what's going on in the immediate area. We'll turn on the cultural sites.
So this is a good way to demonstrate the organization. So the behind the system here has got to be a structure, a data structure. And this is how it is represented in Stalo terms primarily. And there's a combination of English, but we aim to establish things in Halkomelem terms for the various categories of heritage sites and places that we know of and have inventory. So you can see them here.
We have our 9 primary categories, each of which holds subcategories, any of which are searchable on their own and or viewable as we have here. Oops. Viewable all at once. Let me just take that out and reload it. There we go. To go look at the totality of the territory again, here's all the cultural sites throughout South Timuc. Of course, you'll notice a lot of them are focused on the waterways and the Fraser, of course. But to get into our specific example.
And just before you leave that image.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it is so there's a huge improvement in a sense of the content, the volume and content and specificity of what you're looking at here compared to 2007. So what we've done in developing the system is also refine the mapping as much as we can and taking an approach to map as precisely as we can any particular place. And I know there's all kinds of questions and challenges around mapping. We are happy to take questions on that. We're aware of the issues, where you run out of or into what's the word here? But
sensitivities.
Sensitivities are just representational issues using GIS and discrete mapping like this. So it has its limitations, has its pros and its cons, and we're aware of this. But we took an approach to map as precisely as possible, not to overextend. So what you're looking at here is a refined and more robust image of Stalo cultural landscape, in a sense, that we are able to produce in full as you're seeing it, and then otherwise break down into subsequent pieces or look at in its elements.
Right. So I'm going to go back to our referral. I'm going to throw it on top just so we get a good clear outline. I'm going to zoom this out just a wee bit. I keep losing the mouse behind our smiling faces here. There we are. Ooh. So a great deal is going on in the immediate vicinity of this would-be placer mine. We can see we're seeing a lot of greener resource harvesting areas. That makes sense. We're on the Fraser. We're also seeing a couple key little blue spaces, which would fall under Schaepe up here and Haha down here. Now,
And so Schaepe are places that are transformation places in large part. They are related to the Schaepe, which is it has a couple of meanings. One are places that were people in large part turned to stone by Chachels, as the Chachels traveled the world to make things right. So it's also a reference to the time in the distant past when the world was emerging and was out of balance, was not quite right. And so it's all the Schaepe places we have here are really fundamental to the understanding of how Sa'al Tamak comes to be. So they're extremely important, very, very important, very, very sensitive. They're fixed parts of the landscape by Chachels and through transformative actions.
Mm-hmm. And so here they are isolated, and we can zoom in, and of particular relevance here are these specific points, and we can click on them and get the full cultural site breakdown of what exactly we're looking at. And so here we can see this point is named Millie.
Yeah, close.
Yeah,
that's pretty close. It's pretty good.
And it is approximate location is on the hillside above this particular bay. It's associated with two other transformed figures, a woman and her child, as well as some other links. It's seasonally available all year long because it's a big rock in the river. And it was discovered, or I should say recorded, by Sunny, Dave, and Sue.
Right, and that's just a recording of transparency to the mapping process and the entering of data into the system. So 2012, we were getting at that substantially, and Sue was working with us at that time as well. So three of us were kind of a key team to transitioning our data from one, into what you're seeing now.
And so in terms of, actual referral management and dealing with the Crown, we would report back to them in our reporting tool that here are the Stalo interests in the immediate vicinity of your proposed works. Here are our board will decide as right holders, do we support this project? Do we not support this project, or do we support this project? Were there certain conditions put in place?
Right. So if you go back to cultural sites and click, just have the whole Schaepe coming up. I think you've got it as Kate right now.
Yes.
Wait, they're all on. Okay. All right. Good enough.
Good enough. I can turn them all back on. Why not?
that's okay. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I'm still there? Yes, we are still there. And so in this particular example, due to the sort of these really key figures, here's the other one. This project did not go through. Philacus? I'm not sure on that one. That's a toughie.
Can't put me on the spot like that.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. In any case, this point in the Fraser holds a number of figures who were turned to stone by Chahels to stand as lessons for Stalo people for the remainder of time. They are key elements of the landscape, and I've heard them described as elements of not only navigating oneself through the landscape, but navigating oneself through life and how to act appropriately and sort of as a constitution written on the landscape. And so suffice to say, they are of extreme importance, and to have a placer mine right next door would be massively inappropriate. One of the issues more historically with placer mining is the heavy use of mercury. So there's the potential for disturbing chemicals. It's simply not an appropriate use of the landscape in this spot. We explained that to the Crown through our agreement and process, and again, this did not go through, which is good.
Right. So the outcome of a process where in the past, if we only had, if we didn't have the data, or if we just had the cultural data, and we weren't able to understand where proposed development was taking place, we weren't able to visualize that or clearly understand it, we would have had a potentially a different outcome. So in this case, Stalo Connect serves to allow us to relay or relate these different landscapes to one another, assess the potential impacts, and come up with an outcome that we put forward as a decision on the proposed land use, a decision on behalf of the various community or communities, whoever takes the lead, either individually as our members, that includes the Yell First Nation, or as a group of all 15 South Timuc Stewardship Alliance members. So in this case, the outcome was a rejection of that application, and the Crown agreed, and they rejected the application. So it's sort of a good demonstration with an outcome that we saw as having a consistent outcome and agreement between the Crown and ourselves here, with a rejection to what was an inappropriate land use.
Sure.
Dave and Matt, we
Yes.
have a couple of questions. Would you mind if we interrupt you to pose those?
Absolutely.
Yeah, by all means.
Niha, why don't you go ahead and relay the questions?
Okay, sure. All right. So the first one is, and I'm going to read it as it is. I'm wondering if you've encountered data sets that might be determined by a community to contain knowledge that should not be made public, but that this knowledge might still be useful for community to have. And if you have encountered that, how have you modified the software to navigate that?
Do you want to go to the administration page?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a good question. It's a very good question, and it's a question we've faced since we've sought to document what's going on out there in places, various types of places that are either Shulkoyam transformation places. These are people turned to stone, or places of practice in very, very private and sensitive types of cultural practice, spiritual practices, where people go and continue to use portions of the landscape to take care of themselves spiritually, or to I might say curate their spiritual regalia and belongings. Who is going to share that with us, and how, if they do, under what conditions? We've, I guess, built up a trust basis of working with cultural practitioners. We worked directly with a group of cultural practitioners who were deeply involved in and leaders of the smokehouse winter dance ceremonial houses throughout the Central Fraser Valley, to ask these questions and to get their input, take their guidance, knowing that these are sensitive areas, not only to be divulging, but they're sensitive to being impacted by development. And they're actually very integral in the sense of heritage stewardship to take care of. So under that theme of taking care of what belongs to us, well, these are places that are Stalo, they belong to Stalo. And we were able to work with the practitioners to map precisely the locations they were willing to share and to place them into a restricted context based on the direction they gave us, which was they understand the need for housing the data. They don't want this shared, certainly not publicly. They don't want this shared even among their own community members, but they would allow for the sharing and use of the information for people who are using it, needing it to use it for these types of purposes, technically under information sharing agreements that would be renewed every year. So our staff who have access to this do so under specific agreements. And you see here the C restricted sites in this access levels chart that you see it's controlled by the administrator and would then provide access through a controlled window or controlled, a controlled means to know precisely who has access and to be able to turn their access on and off as it's permitted in the system here. So this shows you the various types of users and to some extent the types of data who and how it's played out in terms of limitations on access and control. So does that help answer that question?
Indeed, I think so. And is there another question, Neha?
Yes, there are quite a few. Nick, would you like to come on and ask, or I can ask for you? You're welcome to unmute and ask.
Yeah, sure. I'm just curious where the sources of data are originated from for cultural heritage sites.
Cultural heritage sites. So sources of data, and again, if we go back to the page map that we hit. So what you're looking at there, for example, start there. Here's one example. We just saw Tifloke.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You can go to that.
So Tifloke is mapped out here, and it's a transformation place. It's a Sholkuyam place. It's folks of you who have driven through the Central Fraser Valley might know it as Mount Cheam. It overlooks the valley, and the way we have it defined here is as discreetly as we can, as the woman turned to stone. Tifloke is her name, and we refer to her here as Tifloke. That's her name. Her daughters are nearby, her sister, her dog, all form the entirety of the alpine region, at least of the Cheam mountain range. Where did that information come from? Well, for years, since the 1980s, at least the 1980s, there's been a concerted and consistent effort through the various organizations that were independent, came together, have become independent again, came together, the Stalo Tribal Council, the Stalo Nation. Were as a unit have been at this work for since at least 1985 through generations of elders providing information directly to researchers like Sonny McKelsey, who started at that time with the Stalo Tribal Council, and his job was to go talk to the elders about place names and record the information. And those were the fluent elders at the time, fluent Halkomelem speaking elders in much greater numbers than we have now. So the 1980s was a key point in time. Prior to that, so we're drawing on the directly acquired data through various types of interviews, field visits with elders, knowledge holders, subsequent traditional use studies back in the 1990s. So the Stalo Traditional Use Study, which was a very large, broad-based, multi-community study, many hundreds of interviews, and then digitized to inform what you're seeing here. That and ongoing work we've been doing around traditional land impact studies and so on, continuing to interview and expand the scope of what we have housed here along all of those categories of sites that we showed you earlier, to then digitize them and refine them accurately as best we can to represent. So the sources come from a lot of our own work. But then prior to the 70s, it comes and draws on work from that was carried out in collaboration with the Kokalitsa Cultural Education Center through people like Brent Galloway, Brent Galloway did a ton of work with the Cocolitz elders in the 70s. Chris Kabir and others who collected data at that time and worked like Brent on place names, documenting place names. And he did a lot of work to create the Stalo-Halkomelem geographic place names files. Prior to him, we're looking at the earlier anthropological works of, and you know, those who were more community-based anthropological interest, Oliver Wells, Charles, you know, and earlier on Charles Hill too, you got Franz Boas. It goes back to the earliest recordings that we can find, but in large part, the validity and accuracy that we look to for representation is coming from, I would say, the 70s on up. Where you have one polygon representing a place like Thethel that's been described many times by many people, how do we arrive at one polygon? Well, in order to take care of the place, we need to have an understanding of at least a sense of where to start understanding where it exists on the landscape. So we had to make some decisions about that. And what we ended up with was two approaches, one called the harmonized perspective on a site or place, and one swell-quell. So you see that in another field that allows us to take the consolidation of options here, harmonized or swell-quell. Swell-quell is the Halkomelem term for individuals' life experience, your true news, your true story of your experience. Every single person who's described and mapped out a place, their information is housed in swell-quell. Harmonized is where we've looked at all of those together and sort of taken the best representation of all of those, that's sort of the common ground, and made that into the harmonized view. So that's why the term is intended to represent that, a harmonized view, to use as a primary starting point for the kind of analysis or assessment we do regularly. Can always be expanded to see the scope of alternative supplemental areas that any individual has identified, you know, linked to a place. So it's a bit of a long answer because there's a lot of accumulation of data over the years, and to bring it together into a consistency of methodology and reliability so that it can be used, and it can be used in court, it can be used for multiple purposes. It has taken our focus over the past decade, and actually probably more like 2 decades.
Thank you. Thanks for the answer.
Okay, Sarah, would you like to ask your question? Otherwise, I can ask for you. It's up to you.
Sure. I think it was partially answered a little bit with the conversation about different types of users, but I was just wondering about, publishing these cultural site locations at high resolutions, and how that's mitigated. You know, if those are still appearing on a map for a user, but they're not able to maybe see exactly where it is, or if you do anything like that.
Yes, great question. So what do we publish and make public? This is that balance, and Matt's just perfectly brought up the South Tamaki Use Plan, which is, I think we've made reference to that as one of the plans and policies that we've developed. Really serves that purpose of the mitigating the need to let people know, and also to maintain the private information that needs to remain private. Again, all of this goes back to the Stalo elders in the 1980s. Fundamentally, 80s and into the 90s, fundamentally made a decision consciously to say, okay, the older way of keeping things to ourselves, the best protection mechanism is to not tell anybody, wasn't working anymore given the advancement of urbanization within South Tamaki. So I mean, you look at this, we are dealing with an upriver Halkomelem speaking set of communities, and our data really reflect that. From Sumas Mountain in the middle, big red area right there, landscape feature, to the west we have far less data, and that reflects the fact that we work primarily with, by the way it's worked in over, just the way it is, Halkomelem, upriver Halkomelem speaking peoples. Those elders were subject to the to the eastward movement of urbanization, and we're recognizing the losses that were occurring unmitigated. And when they were broached, when the subject was broached around, you know, what we need to do, and it was really stimulated by the CN Twin Tracking Project in the 70s, 80s, we need to start talking about and documenting these places to protect them. They agreed, and that was really the shift that allowed us to even start opening up to this kind of work, and opening up to the challenges that you bring up in terms of what to publish, what not to publish, what to make public, what not to share. This is an approach that was what you were looking at before, were site-specific data. This is not. This is a use plan, and in terms of in terms of stewardship, most other regions throughout the province have land use plans, and there was a big effort in the 90s to generate these land use plans. There isn't one. There was never one made for the lower Fraser River watershed, which is effectively South Timucua. We saw that as a gap, because that's an excellent, it can be an excellent strategic level planning tool. Before you get to planning specific developments, you should be filtering through some kind of, you know, upper level plan to say, well, where's a place to go if you want to mine? If you looked at this map, you'd be steered away from mining in places that are red, right? That goes with our policy. But what are those red places, and how can we show them? What this does is we started from a blank slate. We took all of our site-specific data, and we started to figure out what makes sense in terms of land use planning needs. So there are places that are very sensitive to any kind of ground disturbance that should be fixed and stay the way they are, unaffected, you know, forever and ever and ever, as they were from time immemorial. And those are cultural landscape features. They include our transformation sites, our flood story features, and so on. And they're consistently site-specific through the previous work you saw till this. They pop up through a plan as, yep, leave these alone. These are our cultural, constitutional parts of the landscape. Beyond that, we built sanctuary areas that you see in orange, and protected watersheds around places of practice that require landscapes that are pristine as possible, that are protected, that are private, and where we knew and know of such practices taking place, we created sanctuary zones that have restrictions on use and guidelines to use, whether it's forestry or whatever it may be, to maintain the integrity of those areas for the purpose of maintaining the practices that occur there. And when there's water-based requirements linked to those practices and that require the purity of water, protection of water, then we establish protected watersheds in relationship to that to protect and maintain the environment that supported the practice. And so we created these categories you see in the use plan that we can and do give to people and encourage being absorbed and taken by industry in particular as the founders for land use plan or actual land use development to have a look at this before they start any planning and work accordingly to deal with the sensitive areas represented here that aren't generally site specific, but and therefore allow us to give it out. It's a public version of the cultural landscape that's oriented towards an audience of land users out there. So the heritage area is really the Stalo Heritage. The Fraser Canyon, it's the watersheds of the lower Fraser River Canyon above Yale. That should really just be left alone. The heritage values there and the links to the description of the heritage area in the South Timucua Use Plan policy that goes along with this map, explains this map, really set out the stakes there that landscape is effectively intact and really needs to remain that way, given the huge quantity of heritage places and values that amass there needs to be left alone. And so it's along these lines that we've developed the South Timucua Use Plan and work to address your question as to what, at least in part, as to what we can make public confidently.
Thank you. We actually have another question. Jennifer, would you like to ask? I think it ties in really well, actually.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking the same. Thank you so much for this. First off, this is amazing. Yeah, my question was building on this idea of the valuation. And I mean, the economics are so crass, but also so important. I was wondering if you ever run into cases where the cultural argument isn't compelling enough, or well, fast enough, but compelling enough, I guess, is related that is there a way to integrate other or additional values? I mean, there's the ecological economics argument, but ideally it's even more regenerative economics. So health valuation metrics in any form, be it like carbon sequestration or biodiversity or social determination of health, those kinds of things.
Right.
This is a wormhole, like there's lots of issues there, but I was wondering, like, is that possible?
Yeah, there's aspects of that. So again, I think there's a couple of offshoot pieces here we can look at. There's two, what do you call it? This version of StaloConnect is
so this is StaloConnect Classic. In addition to StaloConnect Classic, we have, as you know, we've been doing this for 8 odd years now. As new major needs arise, we've sort of hived off separate modules. So we have Classic. We have the major projects module, which was developed specifically to address the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And then we also have the interests module, which is sort of leaned on by the treaty group and things like that.
Yeah, and so we can demonstrate a couple of things. So the interests, so what you're looking at there previously in the Classic shows, you know, site-specific development footprints. Those are plans that have been put forward. It shows, you know, combination of site-specific heritage locations as cultural footprints. They all carry different values, right? So you're getting at a very interesting point here. So this system, you know, including the use plan, is one view. The interests behind them are not shown, and nobody, for the most part, really seems to, or gets has an opportunity to understand what interests on the landscape look like. You know, now that we've gained an understanding of what proposed development footprint looks like, it's tremendous. When you start flipping through the various layers of forestry and so on, it's like, oh my God, you know, the values that are being pursued by that economic landscape, the capital economic landscape of resource extraction, are tremendous. And the valuation, literal valuation we've done of lost monies, you know, the value of resources in monetary terms that have been taken from South Timmuk since the middle 1800s, are billions of dollars, and the government doesn't have enough money to pay Stalo back for that. This system allows us to get at valuation, and that's one of the things we're working on, is allowing, you know, providing the input, the information that we require from the proponents and from government to be put into the system, to have a monetary value associated with whatever volume of timber they're extracting, or whatever volume of minerals or mineral activities, water for commercial purposes. There are huge values that are being used and lost to Stalo in large part, that we can now start to tap into that picture to better understand it. But we can also understand, again, the interest foundations, meaning who holds these. The government has given away the land to all kinds of industry with regards to licenses, leases, and tenures, which is what we mean by interests. So the other system, the StaloConnect interests module, allows us to see that. We've established a relationship with BC to have a live link to the interests that are out there. And so we can take a place like Schaepe again, and go, okay, what are the interests, the nearby interests? So who has been given a right to this land in and around there, and what's it related to? So there's overlapping interests that you can see here, simply by pushing the button, saves us gazillions of hours of time to do this. There's 53 layers of interests that are held by the province alone. And the way they used to approach us was, you know, map booking, literal pages of drawn maps, one at a time, to assess where any point lies in relationship to those interests. And we can do this by pushing the button. And you can see exactly what's overlapping, what kind of crown tenures, trap lines, whatever they may be, recreational sites, whether they're nearby, overlapping, or what. And it carries with them the tenure, the relation to the ministry, to the legislation that's guiding it or regulating it, and who holds it, and again, where that interest comes from, for what basis, monetary or otherwise. The other, I'd say quickly, the other face to this is StaloConnect. Stalo Connect major projects module, which we created specifically, as Matt said, to address a major project, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, the Trans Mountain expansion project. So a huge long linear project that runs through the heart of South Timuc from the Coquihalla Summit to the Burnaby Terminal. And it's broken down like this into various spreads. And you can see the number of provincial permits associated with each of those that we have to assess what the impact is, what the response is. And driving this is the valuation, the economic interest, apparently one that is national in its foundation, to support the petroleum oil industry and its exports from the oil fields in Alberta to, out to sea, in large part to Asia. So the system allows us to map everything out in the various spreads. This is one of those, as it runs through the South Timuc, and we've been able to map out all of the related permits, spatially the footprints of all the permits that are being applied for, and about the 10 or 12 different agencies that are behind those in terms of regulatory agencies and legislation, to then be able to overlap and overlay those with our interests, Stalo interests. And again, comes down to a contest of values, which is what I was getting at earlier. This is a field, and really, really seriously, this creates our field for us in terms of political economic relations, and valuation from a perspective of culture and heritage, to whatever other capitalist sort of perspectives of value may be driving the relationships here, and how you mitigate these in consideration of the interests of the community. The interests of Stalo First Nations that we're providing the service for fundamentally come from a point of taking care of, right? The Hioth Met, the taking care of. And the assessment processes we've built to address those conflicts and come up with the conflict resolution processes, in a sense, are assessment processes developed and continue to be developed like this system that incorporate at their center the well-being of the land, the well-being of the people, and the relationships to the land with the people as foundational parts of assessment. It's something that linked to the Trans Mountain project back in 2000, started 2013, 14, 15, we created and produced what we call the integrated cultural assessment, which was a substantial volume of an impact assessment of the entire pipeline route against a whole series of relational links from, again, at the heart, the center of Stalo well-being and the model of well-being, again, very much linked to the paper that Andrew referenced earlier. At the heart is Shwokweyam, it's Squelquel, it's less that actually, Shwokweyam, it's Shwoli, it's the spiritual connection, interconnectedness of things. There's Tomiuk, there's the principle of interconnectedness in relationships over 7 generations, the future generations, and the past. Like, these are all the things that we're trying to take care of in assessing the impacts of Trans Mountain as one example, let alone all the other footprints of development that we're looking at. That our approach to this, the reason why we are doing this, speaks to your question and valuation. So it's the protection of well-being and place and people that's central to these efforts. And as you're asking these questions, this is good. We're actually getting through some of the other. Yeah, you're leading us in the right direction. So please.
Yeah, and actually we have a very related question. Stefania, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Really amazing work that you've done. I can really sense the passion and the dedication over the years. And I think just trying to get my head around the idea that resource management never really guarantees complete, equitable collaboration, and that consultation does not equal consent. And so in cases where this work is being used, and that's a really great indication of collaboration, and it doesn't lead to consent, I'm curious overall, is there any capacity for this work to be used in courts for reconciliation negotiations, treaty negotiations, or for other purposes?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, not to get too bogged down to the specifics of engagement and referral processing, but each of our 6,000 odd referrals culminates in a classification of level of consensus. So our model has the Crown making their decision, the Stalo board making their decision, and if those are in perfect alignment, that's full consensus, perfect. If it's in semi-alignment, where we may have said you need to do 1, 2, 3 things, and BC said, well, we can do 2 of 3, we call that partial consensus. And then no consensus is pretty straightforward. Someone said yes and someone said no. And then the last and worst possible outcome is no consensus 2, where the Crown has made a decision without even asking Stalo to make their own decision. So it's a unilateral,
Lack of consultation
lack of
completely.
consultation. Yeah.
So we can track this, and the thing to note there is that we've approached this, I think uniquely, to my knowledge. We've taken the approach. Consultation is a process of communicating a plan, and then it's received by us through the system, through an agreement we've established with the SEA, SSEA there, or now it's SEA, the strategic engagement agreement with the province. Sets out the process for communicating around any proposed development, so referrals. It doesn't have an endpoint or an outcome. There's no predetermined outcome there, and we've made sure that that's the case. So by starting a process, you can't simply say no matter what Crown has achieved and taken care of its consultative requirements. You've started a process, and the outcome will be is, from our view and our practice, not just feeding into not just feeding information into the provincial decision-making machinery, but actually feeding information to the Stalo decision-making machinery.
Mm-hmm.
And the rights holders are title holders. We've taken an approach, and our consultation policy sets this out, acting as title holders, which they are, with recognized rights that are agreed, that are set out in the agreements, rights recognition. They are decision makers. So again, it's the field here, the field of power, contests over decision-making. Who has a right to decide what? Well, Stalo, as title holders, Indigenous rights and title holders, have that ability in being self-governing, inherently self-governing, to make a decision over what happens to their land. And so the feedback, the endpoint of our process is a decision statement reflecting the view of a First Nation or some element or all of, it depends on what, the rights holder, which we send back to the province. And at first they never appreciated that. And we were told to cease and desist.
That's right.
Yeah. But no, that's the basis on which the operations exist. It's how Stalo people are regulators equivalent to BC or Canada in the field of resource or land stewardship. Collaboration is a question mark. So we've done a lot of this in collaboration with government. The ability to do a lot of this requires funding. The funding was negotiated through as an element of the strategic engagement agreement, which sets out the pathway and process for engagement, and has done us well. It's again, we built and maintain a large group of First Nations. It's by far the largest of its kind in Canada, working together to support and engage in stewardship activities, and to build relationships with the province. In that case, it's an intention is to build relationships. Our language in the agreement is an objective is to work towards consensus, right? We didn't use the term consent. It's an approach to consent. Consent is something that needs to be determined and decided upon by the rights holder. It's an ability they have. It's a power they have. Consensus is that marrying up or that evaluation, as Matt was saying.
Comparison.
Yeah, comparison. Are we on the same page or not, given a two-headed system? So the relationship has grown, and that's one of the key things. Getting into this, we sat down with multiple agencies. We deal with 14 pieces of legislation, about 7 different agencies, and we were able to sit and meet monthly with the decision-making strata of bureaucracy, basically, the higher upper level administrators who are the actual decision makers on permits. Every month we sat down for multiple years, and we actually got to know each other. And it's been a really good thing. So that contact established and allowed for by the nature of an agreement with some common interests in mind has grown into a very fulsome relationship, and it builds trust, and it follows a pathway we call Letsamot, which is being of one mind. And we've grown out of just the referral process into a collaborative stewardship framework and set of projects with the province as well. So the relationship has expanded, and it's allowed us to grow fuller and truer collaboration with the purpose of developing shared decision-making mechanisms and inputs into the provincial processes of land use, stewardship, and so on, not just process, policy, and procedure, but also inputting back into legislation proposals for change to incorporate Stalo perspectives on things. So there's a lot going on in the relational side here that is bundled in the term we use, collaboration. But working together is, again, it's a Stalo principle. You try to work together, you try to do this with one mind, be on the same page. And out of that, in best case scenarios, consent kind of is built in a way.
Yeah.
And the more you can work on developing the same approaches to stewardship, it seems as though it should reduce the reliance on a consultation process, which inherently is not collaborative.
Dave, we have a few more questions, but I'm also mindful that we're just over 10 minutes to go. Is there anything you guys want to kind of wrap up with, or would you like us to go straight to the remaining questions?
How about we just do a quick, we wanted to, we've covered a lot of the ground we intended to continue to cover in the presentation, but we'll just run through it and make sure it's covered off. The demo, we've talked about Trans Mountain. The Section 4 pilot is one thing we wanted to talk about as a ongoing negotiation with BC to activate, this relationship to legislation. There were two pieces to talk about. One was I just wanted to highlight it. We can come back to it, or I can share information on it later on. There's actually a report on this. One of the referrals we received in around 2016 is something that's put forward every 5 years, and it's the determination of the annual allowable cut for the Chilliwack Forest District, right? Chilliwack Forest District, in terms of economic value, is huge. It's a very active part of the province in terms of forestry composition and allocations for 10 years. So the determination of the annual allowable cut sets out what the requirements are, how much any of the proponents need to cut within that 5-year period. So it's a big deal. And there's tons of activity. In terms of activity, forestry is huge in this region. And it has a gigantic footprint on the land. So when we look at it, and the question is, well, okay, where are we in this picture of determining the annual allowable cut? How is that even determined? We responded to them saying, we need you to incorporate our South Tumuk use plan in your process. We need our sites, the way we've represented them in the use plan, to be considered in as areas of limitation in some cases, or no, not just limitation, but avoidance of forestry activities in your planning, as that may impact your volume you're looking at. Province said, okay, surprisingly, and I think an outcome of the years at that point of working together, they're like, that's okay, we've heard of this, we'll help you, let's do this. So they contributed out of the Chief Forester's office one of their main analysts, Jim Brown, and Karen Brady, myself, Jim, Sue, and a number of folks, Matt, I believe, were all started working on how do you apply the use plan to the determination of the annual allowable cut. And it was a very successful outcome. We were able to work through a number of methodological issues and provide an outcome and a written report that lays this all out. And submit it back to the forester, chief forester, for her, Diane Nichols, for her determination at that time, and they responded in their review, and I think it's on page 19 here.
19. Thank you for that.
There's a specific point in the table of contents that refers to the South Tumuk use plan, First Nations consultation, and I think it's next page. Keep going, keep going. So that would do it. So quick.
Quick.
No, salt and use plan.
Yeah.
Right. So really, end of the day, they encouraged the incorporation of the use plan and this type of sharing of information as something that's of great utility, and the extent to which future supply, this is something that needs to be incorporated fully, like from now on, into forestry planning. And because it was introduced into this process, it's become now considered a standard part of the process and will be required through the legal procedures next time it arises, right? So you move, and I think I want to make this point because it's the ability to move a plan that's a unilaterally developed plan into a process and have it taken up to become a legal requirement in ongoing activities of stewardship and planning within a territory. So it's something folks should be aware of as to, we kind of realized this. First of all, we got the uptake. The uptake had an implication and an outcome that entrenched this in a regulatory process. So wanted to touch on that before we moved along. And then one more thing, very quickly, the Section 4 pilot, which is an approach to activating Section 4 of the Heritage Conservation Act, which allows for the expansion of protection to sites other than what's really recognized as archaeological sites. So we've been working for 4 years now. It's supposed to have taken 1 year. 4 years with the province negotiating this. And we've used the system again to help us move it through the process of, number one, we can identify all the sites we want within our pilot area. So maybe we can show the pilot area. There you go. So this is the area we're working in. What sites do we have that we want protected? So Thiefel is one of those. We want our transformation places, our people who are turned to stone. They're not recognized in law. They're not protected. We want those, and I've always seen that as a shortcoming of the Heritage Conservation Act and why we took the field ourselves. But so for example, Thiefel, like you saw before, is one of those sites, places that we've identified as requiring, as included in this process. So question is then, what are the interests there? If the province would ask the question, if we protect these places, meaning exclude activity and land development, what interests are we going to be impacting? That's when we were able to use the interest analysis module to determine that for each and every site. And if we go back to the PowerPoint, we can see, and this is a shareable. These are places, it's at, again, back to, can we share this? I'm comfortable sharing this. It doesn't say what they are, but it shows where some of the sites are. And it shows all the blue areas. So it's this literal translation of the interest, or sorry, not the interest so much as the intent to view cultural and economic interest landscapes at the same time that are absolutely necessary to actually move anything through this governmental system. So this is one view for, I believe it's mining activities and mineral tenures. There's another view that shows there's some aspects of protected areas. So in some cases we're on the same page. The province and we are not out of alignment in terms of the interests of protection and environmental stewardship. So there's not always an inherent conflict. Sometimes there's an inherent consistency with the interests. And I think there may be one more, which is just the list of the schedule. It's requirement to provide a schedule. So this is an earlier version of a schedule that shows how we code and report out using the system on the relationships to these kind of places and outcomes of that analysis. And we work with the province collaboratively to do this, to determine, okay, how do we represent the outcome? We determine that, well, when you see the relationships there, if they're not problematic, we're going to give them a green code. So the difficulty column on the right is anything you see that's green is like no problem. Yellow means, yeah, there's some mitigation need, and red means there's a higher degree of mitigation in order to get that site protected. But out of, in this case, I think the 40 sites we were looking at, like 38 were green. So it went against the inherently sort of, I would say, fearful approach or perspective that the province has, is further protection is going to create and limit their interests in land use and development inherently. And what we see is that simply isn't the case. So we're still working to get this completed, and hopefully next year this will get through to ministerial approval and become, these sites that are in here will become legally protected in both our and provincial systems. So at that, we'll leave it at that. And I'm sorry if we don't have too much time left, but
Okay.
whatever time left, we're happy to sit here as long as you want to. Matt's willing to sit here till midnight. He told me this.
It's COVID, what do I gotta do?
Yeah, it's a Friday. He doesn't care to get home.
All right, okay, good to know. We do